Good morning, everybody. So this last week I've been thinking a lot about resiliency, which was a big thing in the master's degree thing. Is how do you help people deal with issues in our lives or or our own health and issues? It's a very interesting thing. In this Facebook group around called Stoicism, right? Around how do you just deal with life as it comes. And one of the discussions is how do we deal with inequities in life? And it's a great discussion of maintaining equanimity or a stable sense of self and emotion in a world that is inherently unfair. And it brings up a lot of issues. And one of the huge issues is we have the idealistic thing of everybody should have um, enough resources to live out a full life of what is it, 4 score and 7 years, somewhere in there, right? And we don't have that in the world. And there was a little cartoon somebody put up about the aliens asking about Earth and saying, "No, people are starving. What? You don't create enough food? Oh yeah, we have plenty of food for everybody. Well, why doesn't everybody eat? Oh well, it's logistics. We don't know how to get food to everybody. And the real thing is, the reason not everybody gets food on this earth is because of fear and greed. And then all the groups want to say it's somebody else's fear and greed. It's not mine. And that's a very interesting thing I've found through experience that all groups of people have about the same percentage of persons who act on fear and greed without external pressures. And most people at the, it's interesting because we talk about this a lot in philosophy, is are humans inherently good or evil? And then how do you define good and evil? And there's kind of um, a general, well accepted definition, which is not universal, of caring about your community, caring about the future, um, being willing to sacrifice one's happiness and or well-being in order for the community or for others to prosper, are all good. And selfishness, wanting to live forever, taking resources from other people, those are all considered evil by um, the dominant um, mindset, whether you're Muslim or Christian or Jewish or Hindi or Buddhist or atheist or spiritual, not religious. Every group, the most respected people seem to be that. And then, of course, we have the sad reality that what we really worship, which is like where do we put our attention and where do we put our money, is the violent, greedy um, persons who use force or chicanery to get more resources. And it's neat because then we call them job creators, and that's a very interesting issue that I won't get sidetracked into. Of how does one practice equanimity or stoicism or being completely in the moment and then deal with injustice and what is injustice, but really, what do we do about injustice? And it looks very much like the society, the social reality is that a person who has social power, whether they are quote moral or immoral unquote, gets a free pass for what we would call bad behavior, and people on the other side of poverty or skin color in terms of perception, right? And that's a great discussion of, is skin color still an external problem in the United States? And of course, most of us pretty much do see, yeah, if you have a certain color skin, you're either going to have uh, a lot of leeway in your behavior and affect and mannerisms. And if you have other colors of skin, you're not going to have that leeway. If you just meet somebody on the street, we have an idea of how they're going to behave and what we should do with them based on their skin color. And then back to what do we do about that? And Morgan Freeman famously said, "Don't talk about it." And that's very interesting, right? What if we just don't talk about skin color? Does the unfair treatment go away? Is it possible to make it go away? If it is not possible, how do we deal with it? Um, and again, that balance. If you, I don't know how Morgan Freeman feels right now. That was one interview he did where he said that. And what did he mean? He meant if we all ignore race, oppression around race goes away. I think that's true. How do we get there? I don't know. Do we get there by having persons like Morgan Freeman and Candace Owens and uh, Herman Cain and Ben Carson say, well, it's already not a problem, and then we believe them, and then it goes away? And this gets back to outrage. If you're outraged about the mistreatment of people by people with more power, whether it's physical force or financial resources or the bully pulpit, are you then not emotionally stable? Now, if you start acting out in a violent way, is that necessary, right? And and so we have this great discussion as we have lots of conflict between law enforcement officers and people who are on the low side of uh, the socioeconomic status. And then we start having assumptions about law enforcement by one side and about the persons with certain color skin on the other side and low socioeconomic status. And then we have physical altercations. And what do we do about it? Do we get, uh, can we do anything? Is it something possible to change? And some people are, they think they're stoic, and I think they're more, hopeless. I'm trying to think of the word, but they just don't believe it can change. So here we are. We have this with no sense of getting all head up about it because it's not going to stop no matter what we do. We're always going to have people with privilege and power and people who are being harmed by not having privilege and power. And so let's just accept it. And then we have people who say, well, what did Malcolm X, by any means necessary, we need to stop this oppression. And then we have people that say, well, it's not oppression, it's reality. So people who are going to, quote, misbehave, unquote, need to be only respond to force. And that's another interesting thing is people who only respond to force, what do we do with them? Because most of us respond to social pressure or um, appealing to our better nature or many other non-force things. And some of us just don't. Some people just only respond to, if you do that, we will physically stop you. And so I'm seeing more and more as a complicated issue to talk about for maintaining some sort of emotional homeostasis, internal emotional stability, while working towards, uh, for lack of a better phrase, a more fair and just society. What does that look like, and is it effective? And we had these marches after George Floyd was murdered, and there's it's very complicated issues because the person had a history of drug addiction and um, had pled guilty to some violent activities in the past, and he ended up being killed. Then the protests started out peaceful, and then the law enforcement officers, what looked like to me, made assumptions about the crowd and were violent. And the the protest then spread, and there was all kinds of ancillary activities of burning down businesses and breaking and destruction of property. And of course, that brings up a whole other issue of, is property more sacred than human life? And of course, to some people it is. So again, we have this, what do we do about this injustice? And it's historically the the persons that took on the idea of nobility in Europe, where this dominant culture comes from, did believe if you were noble, your right to pleasure, much less um, the necessities of life, overrode uh, other people's right to life. And people were often killed for hunting for rabbits or deer that the nobility thought they owned. So this is a long-standing tradition of property being more important than most people's lives. Um, the discussion that I think we would have in a philosophical group or a Stoa group is not whether the protest should happen, that we should protest violence. The question is, what does it look like? Does it look like this apparently random violence against property? Um, does it look like the Million Man March that Martin Luther King did? And that seems like the ideal, right? You have a show of moral force that is not a threat of violence, saying this will not stand. Um, and I go back to something I always say, because to me the the ancillary activities around these protests seemed like uh, instability, upset, and not effective. And so we're back to, what if you maintained your equilibrium? And there's the whole excuse me, there's a whole thing of if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. And of course, what does that mean? And there is a point where we're learning about the physical realities of fear or anger without physical outlet, is it causes harm to your own body. And a lot of meditative peoples are saying anger or the desire for revenge is like taking poison and hoping it'll harm the other person. And maybe that's true with these actions, right? Maybe it's harmful to the cause of reducing oppression. And then the whole thing of, does oppression come from fear or from, because greed to me is based on fear. I can't, there's never enough. So we have to have more and more and more. Why? So we can survive. Um, so that's a whole issue around judging the, what we could call hoarders, right? And there was just a little meme that I forwarded, and it's right that if we were studying another species and they were hoarding resources and and therefore part of that species was suffering, we would think, what's wrong with that member of that community? And with humans, we think, um, wow, isn't it so great that that person's so rich? And it's not everybody, because there's a lot of pressure about, oh, anybody who amasses too much fortune is immoral, is wrong. So, um, hold on. So the desire to amass a great fortune is conflicted in the humans. That some think that that's a great thing, and you call that person a job creator. Um, and maybe they are. Maybe those jobs would be there anywhere. You know, when Walmart came in and created all these jobs, a lot of little stores shut down, so there was a net even job. So they're not job creators. Is there more security having a huge corporation that won't be threatened by economic downturns? Although it does seem like big corporations just get rid of employees as quickly as they can. All kinds of questions like that. So, how do we maintain function and emotional resilience while striving to have a better society? And one of the huge things that we do that doesn't seem to me like emotional resilience or stoicism or balance is vilify what we call the other. If you're a Republican, you vilify Democrats. If you're a Democrat, you vilify Republicans. If you're a churchgoer, you vilify other churchgoers who don't go to your church, and you vilify people who don't go to church. If you refuse to go to church, then you vilify the churchgoers. And all that seems on the surface very helpful, and then it turns out that it's the same human nature in every group, and so we're not, once you otherize or dehumanize another group and humanize yours. There's a great thing that several famous people, even Rush Limbaugh, if we do it, it's right. Why? Because of who we are. If they do it, it's wrong. Why? Because of who they are. And so this is a huge thing that happens in terms of trying to achieve social justice is we vilify and then punish. And it all comes, so that's to me an imbalance in um, our emotional stability. So it's not stoic, it's not philosophical, it's not advanced. It's those people are bad, we're good, so we have to annihilate them. So the U.S. went into Afghanistan, the U.S. went into Iraq um, based on those other people are bad and we're good. Russia is going into Ukraine based on those people are bad and we're good. And not even, well, it's just like I deserve these resources and you don't. Um, and so when you try to advance beyond that, and that's the only way I think we can get to more fair, just society is advance beyond making people other, and then having larger consensus, have more of what Martin Luther King had with that Million Man Marches. A large, peaceful, strong consensus saying this will not stand. This mistreatment based on identity will not stand. And then, of course, we have to have a whole different idea of justice. I mean, really, it seems like European. So I don't know about China or Russia. I know about European and American justice that it's about punishment as a means of trying to, well, get revenge. And then they start making up things about, oh, well, it prevents other people from doing the same crime. Maybe it does. And if that's the only way to prevent crime is to wait till somebody's committed one and then use them as an example, well, I guess we have to do that. I don't know if that's true. I bet there's other ways as well. So, really going to think about this, how to be maintain emotional resiliency, self-care, and look for ways to help society get more just and fair. And of course, as you get more and more people, it becomes more and more of one person can't do that much. And then do you give in? Do you become nihilistic and say, oh, well, or do you keep working at it and be a little bit delusional? All righty.